Our next speaker is Jordan Axani, and I had the opportunity to meet Jordan last year. He was a speaker at TEDx Toronto, and since then we've had a chance to work together and chat quite a bit. You're going to really enjoy what Jordan is going to share with you. And now, I won't say too much about Jordan. What I am going to say is that he was the subject of the most popular viral interest story in human history on the web. One of the most popular viral human interest stories on the web. But he currently helps people and organizations be raw. He also has a new podcast coming out called Imposter Cast, and I am thrilled to invite Jordan Axani to the stage.
We're going to start off a little differently. We're in a small space, we're in an intimate event, and we have the opportunity that you normally don't when we're at a speaking event of any sort. So what I'm going to ask is this. Let's all take a second, just sort of put down our arms, and let's close our eyes. Okay? Just for a moment, I'll tell you when to open them. And listen very closely. I feel like my life is a lie. I'm scared of my dad's belt. I say I'm okay even when I cut myself. I've thought of suicide 26 times. I'm already gone. Just take a second. Let those words sink in. Now, before you open your eyes, I want to tell you, those were written to me by grade 8 students in Cranbrook, British Columbia 2 weeks ago. And they were shared over an anonymous platform where without judgment and without your peers knowing, you could share your deepest, darkest secret in real time. Open your eyes. And what happened is it displayed on a screen in front of all of us. Unfiltered, it showed up. There was no identifier. We didn't know which phone number the message came from. We didn't know who it was in the room. But when we opened our eyes and looked at the screen, we were all taken aback to realize, holy shit, we're not alone. And in fact, people that were only feet away from us were feeling the exact same thing. Again, grade 8 students. And we think we know what's going on, and really we have no idea. And the truth is, when I was there, standing on this stage and looking back at the audience, I remember being in grade 8. I remember feeling down on my worth. I remember questioning a lot of things. And I think if I had the opportunity to share my deepest, darkest secret without consequence, I would have probably written something that was very similar. And so what I did is I as a way to cope from years of being bullied in my very small town just north of here, I figured out how to be a chameleon, because being a chameleon enabled me to survive. It was a coping mechanism. It was the ability to be able to blend in with any community at any given time and figure out how to get the things I thought I wanted to feel whole. So tonight the question is about digital versus analog community. How has our desire for digital shaped our sense of community? What we're going to talk about here is that, as Stephen rightfully said, it's not an either-or question. But I think when we talk about community, I think we can all agree that community has eroded, yet it's more critical than ever before. And the time when I learned this in the most surprising and in many ways devastating way was a year and a half ago. A year and a half ago, not far from where we are right now, I was living in Cabbagetown. I was at the end of a relationship, as we have all been before. And it was a hard one. It was one of those big ones that really shakes you. And so I did the same thing that so many people do in a post-breakup state. I hid in my apartment for weeks and weeks as much as I could. I binged on Netflix, I drank beer, I ate tubs of ice cream in my boxers. And then I went to a dinner, about 72 days after the breakup, but who's counting? I went to a dinner, and a friend of mine asked me a simple question. They said, hey, what are you doing with that extra plane ticket that you have? And the plane ticket was for this crazy trip around the world that I bought for my partner and I, long before we had split up, months and months before. And I answered the question. I said, you know, I don't really know, but I think I'm still going to go and just change the itinerary. And my friend, who's rather adventurous with his idea, said, you know what, screw that. Why don't you try to give it away? And we laughed. The whole table just burst up. We erupted. How would you give away a plane ticket with someone's very specific name on it? And that was that. The night went on. It was a great night. The next morning, I wake up. It's a Sunday. I went to the office because I work on the weekends. And I was sitting there. I was looking at my laptop, and I was like, you know what? Life sucks. I'm not happy. She's gone. She ain't coming back. What do I have to lose? And almost instinctively, I went to Reddit. And I posted an enormously tongue-in-cheek post without editing it in 15 minutes. And I posted it. I closed my laptop, didn't think a word about it, not until the next morning when I woke up. I looked at my Facebook. The first thing I did, turned over, looked at my phone, and all of a sudden in the top corner I see 352 notifications. And I look at them, I'm like, how bizarre, there must be something wrong with Facebook. Lo and behold, people were tagging me in the post and sharing it, and it wasn't long minutes, really, before I received the first email from Vice, and then from BuzzFeed, and then from Gawker, and then from CNN, and then from movie producers, and then from, yes, a couple Elizabeth Gallaghers, which was the name of the plane ticket, and hundreds and thousands of other people. And this journey, and it did lead to actually going on this trip with someone else, this journey earned 4.2 billion media impressions and stayed in the global media for about 6 months. It was on the front page of the largest daily paper in China. It was, it was virtually everywhere. The trouble is when you're in that moment, it was only a matter of days before all of a sudden I found myself in LA. And I found myself in the office of a guy named Adam Bennett. Adam Bennett is Adam Sandler's agent. And he's entirely as awful as you would imagine he would be. This guy has this big gold desk, and it's in this corner office at William Morris Endeavor. And he's on the phone yelling at people, his poor assistants running around, hey, get Mark on the phone, grab me a coffee, no, do this other thing. Like, he was that guy. It was awful. And I found myself sitting there, and he looked at me, he said, dude, we are gonna make you into something bigger than you could ever imagine. All of a sudden, I was letting others define me. Because for someone with no self-worth, you can imagine being in this moment all of a sudden, people are telling you who you are and what you were going to become. And it wasn't just the entertainment people, not at all. It was the media, it was the general public profiles, the fact that anytime I walked down the street, someone would say, hey man, you should really hook up with that girl you're going on that trip with. It was the fact that I could not shake off this narrative, yet by the same token, I was getting rewarded for it. And it went, and it went, and it went, and I found myself the morning we were doing pre-production on a reality TV show, which I was going to be the focus of, if you can imagine. I woke up one morning, and I looked in the mirror, and I was like, I hate myself. I hate what this has become. And quite literally, I actually did hate myself. Because all of a sudden, I was so divorced from any semblance of who I was. But the truth is, I had no idea who I was. And the truth is that I had relied on external validation for so many years to have any idea of what I really wanted and who I really was. And so I got into these communities, these hives of other imposters. I felt like a total imposter. And if you can imagine, all of a sudden you're in the entertainment hive. We started a charity. So there's this charity hive, there's this community. There's a startup community. There's the media community. There's the speaking community. There's the author community. All these different people, and I found myself being the chameleon to each and every one of them. I found myself saying yes. I found myself playing the part to the best of my abilities, but I was driving myself insane. And so when I acknowledged that I hated myself and that I hated my life, and I hated what this had become, I started saying no to the lie. And what happens when you say no to the lie that is perpetuated by a certain community is they leave you. You get kicked out. Because all of a sudden, you're calling out this truth that everyone else believes. So I broke down, big time. I was living in the US. I was actually living in Cincinnati. And I was in my apartment for days and weeks, and I honestly didn't know if I'd ever leave that apartment. And it wasn't until someone flew from Chicago, a mentor of mine, and came and basically knocked on my door to see what was going on. And I had cut out all my communities, even my family at that point. I felt so alone and just like there was nothing left, right? Especially after that high. Even though it was a fake high, it was still a high. And all of a sudden, there was this moment where he came, this guy, and he looked at me squarely in the face and he said, "You are more than this story. You are more than your story, and you always have been." And I didn't believe it. But then he said again, "You are more than your story." And it was those words that, over a lot of time and a lot of energy, it changed everything. It changed how I looked at community. It taught me what authenticity really is. Specifically, authentic, real communities. Authentic communities are, well, let's back up. Authenticity is what you have when everything else is gone. It's what's at the core. If you strip away all the fluff, all the BS, all the facades we put on, that's what it is. And it's there that you can have a real community. So what went from one person pulling the truth out of me turned into several others. And I found myself curating people in my life that helped me be resilient. People that held me accountable for all my screw-ups and from the mess that I'd caused. But people that encouraged me to be more resilient and more human and more me. And it was painful. It was awful, actually. But it was a hope. And so the question, if we think about digital or analog, if we think about communities, what I ask myself is, whether it's a digital or an analog community, how can we go from having an imposter community to a real authentic community as quickly as possible? How can we start to change that narrative? How can we cut out those unconstructive, fake communities of our lives so we can seek something more real? So let's go back to what I shared with you off the top. So those were 6 keynotes between grade 8s, 9s, and 10s in Cranbrook, BC. And on the last day of 3 days, and the last keynote, we opened up the microphone to anyone that would be willing to come forward and share what their big lie was. So the question that I asked to get those responses off the top, after I talked about my own vulnerability, of course, was, what's your big lie? And then what happened after the big reveal of them on the screen, we invited different students to come up and read some aloud, even though they didn't know who they're from, read some aloud and then reply to them. And then after that, we invited the opportunity for people to come forward and share the story of their big lie. So note how we're going from anonymous digital to acknowledgement and ownership, okay? All the way to someone actually coming up and putting a face to a very real lie. It always takes the first volunteer to get the first dozen to come up. And so, after a moment, I extended the invitation. Who would like to come forward and share their big lie? And eventually I see a hand in the back, just a little bit. I said, "Is that a hand at the back?" And it sort of goes down a bit, then it comes up again. I said, "Okay, come on up." And this woman comes up, and she's looking very sheepish. And she comes up, she grabs the microphone, and she giggles. And I whisper over to her, I said, "You okay?" And she said, yeah, I want to do this." I said, "Okay." The next words out of her mouth took me away. She said, "When I was in grade 1, I was sexually assaulted. And the person that sexually assaulted me made me sexually assault some of my friends, too. And growing up, since that moment, no one aside from the people that were there ever believed me. They never believed that I was coerced into doing that to my friends. And because of that, it's made growing up impossible. And I've thought so many times about ending it all, but the only reason why I didn't end it all was because, to quote directly, I have people that need me." And the next quote If I leave, so will they. We're all in tears, you can imagine. We look around the room, and her and I are standing at the front looking back. And you see the sheer devastation on everyone's face because they all know what that feels like too, in their own way. They know what it feels like to have that and hold something like that within them. And then you hear a clap in the back corner. Before you know it, 550 students, grade 10s, that had no idea what they were in for that day are on their feet. They're cheering her name. The standing ovation would not end for about 3 minutes. She tried to go back to her seat, thinking that would calm the clapping down. It didn't. And she came up to me afterwards and she said, "That was the first time in my life I was validated for who I really am, for the real me." Think about the gravity of that moment. And think of what we accomplished using technology. So to answer the question of the night, by creating places, like in that room where it's impossible to be an imposter, because we're all just put our lies out there, and that we've all acknowledged that everyone's hurting somehow, it makes me believe that real, authentic communities are more critical than ever before. And the onus of us is to use technology that allows that and creates that opportunity to go from an anonymous interaction on a screen with sharing something to having others verbally acknowledge it, all the way to having real, in-the-moment, human ownership of something that's so deep and something you would never share otherwise. That is a real community, and it was created out of something that was so far from that, only 45 minutes earlier. And so that's the opportunity of digital. How can we use that opportunity to hit a big reset button on our communities every day? That's the question I ask myself. Thank you very much.